Okay, so again, when you're working with colors from nature, you want to be able to look at a color. Like here, we've got this yellow. It's kind of yellow orange. Yellow's, it's not a pure yellow. So anything that's not a pure yellow, it's going to be some mixture of the color with its complement, okay, or a color, that is analogous to it, next to it. So here it's a slight, there's yellow, kind of yellow orange, then also a grayed down yellow, which is you mix yellow with a little bit of violet, and you'll get what you call a grayed down yellow. So if I were to try and mix that color, this color like right here, I would take some yellow, okay, and then I have a little bit of violet right there. If I mix a little bit of violet with it, it kind of grays it down. Okay, so now you can see it's kind of a muddy yellow. Um, Now it also has a little bit of a more of a red violet tinge, so orangish tinge to it. So you can see with just a tiny bit, it actually changes the color pretty dramatically. So you have to be careful when you're adding color, and you want to add just a tiny bit at a time. So, but that's actually almost spot on to what that color was. So it's actually the color grayed by mixing it with, this is purple, which is also called violet. So, and then a tiny, tiny bit of that, which is already in the paint from when I was mixing the gray. So when I actually made this darker tone over here, this color, it's actually violet, which is a mixture of the red violet with blue, and then that mixed with some yellow, okay, to gray it down so it wasn't such a vibrant purple. I want it to be the shadow color in here. Now, you could say, well, that looks black. Well, when I actually held the purple up to it, it doesn't. The purple is actually darker than that color. So, in the end, when I mix all the other colors around it, these colors will appear darker, and these lighter colors will appear brighter. So, again, any color on this in this design can be created with basically these colors on my palette. I brought in the green just for this one little area down here because the yellow and the blue may or may not make that green. So that was just kind of a little cheat right there. And then some of these colors out here, which kind of almost like the brownish tones. Brown is actually a mixture of blue and orange, and so I may use some of that in there depending on the kind of colors. I may not need it, honestly. So again, so there's as complicated as this image looks, it's actually it actually has I can actually create everything in here with only a few colors. Okay. So what I've been doing is creating these shapes that are in the rocks, and so I'm going to try and finish up this stuff. And I'm basically just sort of suggesting, where this stuff's at. My paint's starting to dry up a little bit. Started this last class. With acrylics, the great thing about acrylics is they dry fast. Bad thing about acrylics is they dry fast. It's very hard to work back into things. So what I'm trying to do is just lay out kind of the shadow side of the form and create a sense of where shapes are. So when I come back in with some of the other colors, I'll be able to establish a sense of form and kind of organize these areas into shapes that actually, will hopefully be a little bit better, more organized than the actual photograph itself. But the key is to create the sense of light and dark side. Okay, so again, it gets a little random in some of the spots. So I'll try and organize some of the shadow areas into shapes that appear a little more like form. Okay, so even though you work from nature, you're trying to create what you're seeing. Sometimes what you're seeing is a little bit visually confusing, so you have to organize it by changing the way the light and dark sides come together, and and maybe exaggerating some shadows and leaving out some other shadows, because some of the stuff will actually just kind of confuse the viewer and what you're actually trying to represent. Okay, so and trying to do pretty complex painting here. This is one of the ones that the students were, this is one of the squares out of 15 squares for this painting. And this was one of the sections that the students really had trouble with because it's pretty complex. And so they weren't used to, how to actually set it up. So that's why I wanted to demonstrate this morning how that's working. Take this off. I don't have anybody within 6 feet of me over here. Okay, so got most of the stuff I want to get. And I want to be able to come back in and put some darks back in again once I paint over the colors. Because a lot of this stuff will have color painted back into it, breaking up the shadow side a little bit, but just with some color variation. But just want to make sure that I've got enough of this information down to where when I start working on the rest of it, I don't kind of lose track of where I'm at. And some of it is about how you use the brush too. Kind of drag the brush, you can create some, texturing as opposed to putting out all solid shapes. So I did that a lot up in there, where the form was a lot more fragmented, kind of like it is in some of this stuff. But I'm also trying to create a sense of direction, direction of movement, like over here. You want this kind of movement of these shapes, kind of following a pattern of directional movement. So now it feels like it's flowing down to these rocks and these rocks. So again, you're going to have a sense of this moving in that direction, these moving up here, this stuff moving down this direction. Okay, so this color right here again is not violet. It's actually violet neutralized with a little bit of yellow. And okay, so I just want to establish what's happening right here. And again, this area has a directional movement. Moving up this way, across here. And then missed the rock. Just laying out this rock over here. All this was laid out really lightly with a pencil ahead of time, indicating where all the shapes were going to be. Partly that's because I'm trying to match up with other pieces, so I want to make sure that that this thing's going to line up, but also so that when I start painting, I know kind of where the shapes are. Okay, I could just have freehanded this whole thing, but that's a whole nother process. It's a little more advanced. And I'm trying to do this in a way that that I would expect you to try to do. Okay, so I pretty much got those color areas laid out. I'm going to clean these brushes out. When you're cleaning your brushes, you want to pull the paint off first. Get as much paint off the brush as you can. All right, and then put them in the water. Get most of the rest of the paint off. So in other words, you don't need to dirty your water up. Just get most of the paint off first. And then once most of the paint's off, and you use a lot of paper towels. We go through literally almost a whole roll of paper towels in class every day or two. So that's one of the huge school size rolls. Okay, so you notice it doesn't really dirty the water up that much. You're going to have to get all the paint out, or else when you go to start mixing some of these colors. So The next area I'm going to do is pretty simple. All right, so this is just the blues, and it just turns out that this blue that we have is exactly the blue that's in here. So I want to do this next. And the thing about this is I'm going to have to do it pretty fast because I want to kind of create it in one tone. That's why it's kind of good that it was laid out in advance. I don't have the best brush for this right now. But if I keep the area kind of wet, I can keep working it. Cut that edge. And this would be hard to come back and lighten. So fortunately it's just about the exact right color for this whole area there. You notice how by keeping it wet I can keep it kind of smooth, because and it's okay if it's a little dark at this very edge right here. And it's going all the way down to that area. And you notice when I'm painting over this color in the background that was already on there, it's basically, this color is somewhat transparent. This blue is pretty transparent. So you see that darkness through it, right? So and it also takes on that purple in the background now takes on that bluish tone. So it becomes a part of that color. So right. Probably gonna stop the recording briefly after I finish this little section, just so I can break these recordings up into short segments. But like I say, you want to keep the area wet enough to where it blends and it keeps relatively one tone. I mean, it's not perfectly one tone in there either, so it's okay if it's not flawless, but I have to do this area pretty fast. This goes all the way down. Yep. About here. Okay, and that really helps to set up, the overall feel of the space. Now it seems a little darker than our boat. So let me just do this. I'm gonna lift some of the color off with a paper towel. I'm gonna lift a little of that color off. And that's because the paint got a little thick. And when it dries darker, so it got a little darker than I wanted. So I'm actually pulling some of the paint back off by putting some water on it. It'll be alright though. It'll be just a little bit darker than it is in the actual photograph. So there's some of the color still in the background back here. So pull some of that up in there. And when the paint's like this, fairly thin, it's almost like working with a watercolor. So let's see. Paint down a lot of these areas back there that are blue and darker. trying to leave that white line there if I can, but I'll probably have to come back in with white paint and actually paint it in. But anywhere I see like this bluish tone, I'll just go ahead and paint in those areas. So, tricky bit of business there.
It's actually not.
Okay, so you can start to see, you know, that shape, that space taking shape. And what really you're going to see is the kind of the light and dark of all this, because where this blue is and where the purple was, that's really the dark side. So by the time I get done throwing in these shapes, it's going to have a pretty good sense of light and dark in the composition. It's interesting.
I purposely coded mine was jet blue.
I took a screenshot, but I didn't look at
Spirit.
what. It's not Spirit. It's not Spirit. It's probably Delta.
Ooh, dang. You can afford Spirit. Wait, don't you guys have the same amount of money?
See, I could afford. I could have bought the first class seats, but then.
You would have no money.
What city do you live from? Oh, I could buy like the ultra first class one.
City, ultra first. What have you been doing in New York?
And it's only a 2-hour flight.
Question. What even is first class? Like,
But like,
privileges, whole pan.
Bella, if we were going out the country, it's only a 2-hour flight.
Okay, so that's a lot of, I got a little bit of blue down here
It is. It's like 2 hours.
It's nonstop.
in the water. So I'm going to put some of that in.
Stop in Detroit.
There's a pen.
And then I had to go to, I stopped in New York and I had to stop in,
Again, using a little dry brush to create this texturing that I see in the water.
Go to New York? No, I didn't. I was in New Hampshire, but no, because they didn't have a 15-minute flight, so I stopped in New York. Stopped in New York. I didn't do New York to New Hampshire. I didn't think we were going to layover. Oh, yes, we did. Wait, no, we didn't. Never mind, that was the layover was hard. I feel bad for people.
All right, and I'm not talking much, just trying to stay focused on making sure this stuff works out pretty well. And a lot of this is just the first layer of paint. A lot of this is going to have several layers by the time it's done. So this piece is probably about a 4 or 5 hour piece of work by the time it'll be done. That would be, you know, Stu working on it. It would take probably at least 4 or 5 hours to do just this one piece.
This is my only clean jacket. My other one.
That's what I kept saying. I was like,
This is my only clean jacket.
at least Bella's like, I said that to her, I'm like, you're gonna go on a 2-week trip with her.
Wait, when?
You're gonna like,
You're not gonna talk to them? Still?
no, I can see how lovely.
Well, obviously they're gonna see them. Wait, where are you gonna go?
So indicating where some of the water is, and up here,
Where? Like state?
it's falling down over a rock. Great.
I'm leaving home. Boston.
Wow. Friendship here is so high.
Okay, like I said, a lot of this will come back in. I'll come back in and work back into it.
Unless you want to call it a teardrop.
Oh, well, my parents got the vaccine.
Okay, so
You remember me, right?
I mean, they
let's
just
see,
went to
maybe just a
downtown.
couple
They're
more
not doing it
spots. Where I got some blue. Some of this I'll have to come back in with an opaque color to kind of paint over some of these shapes.
That's very unfortunate. It's not like it's not like we could get it. My dad was like, yeah, it doesn't matter if you guys get it or not. And I was like, hold on.
Seems like a good plan.
You guys choose your life. Yeah, I know. And why not?
All right.
It's just the one that one shot.
Erase those black.
Wait, why is your parents getting it?
You don't have to go to hospital or anything.
A punion.
It is. A waste of what? Waste of time.
Okay, and then I'll probably come back in and do some of the purple back into that. Bring out some more of the darkness back into it. Once I get further along. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording for now.